Hi everyone. In this video, I want to talk about the north and the south node of the moon. First, from an astronomical perspective, what they are, how they are formed, and so on. And then I'll talk a bit about their astrological significance in light of the upcoming eclipses that will occur on October 25th with a partial solar eclipse, and then 2 weeks later on November 8th with a total lunar eclipse. Astrology is deriving meaning from astronomical phenomena, and the north and the south node of the moon, in Vedic astrology referred to as Rahu and Ketu, are such important points to examine because they symbolize the path of our consciousness, the path that our consciousness is moving along to evolve. So let's dive in. This represents the orbital plane of the moon, the path of the moon going around the Earth, which is one revolution per month, or about every 27.32 days. And this depicts the ecliptic. Geocentrically speaking, so looking at it from Earth, it's the apparent path that the Sun makes around the Earth over the course of a year. Of course, we know that the Earth revolves around the Sun, but it's a different perspective that is still used in spherical or positional astronomy and for astrological purposes. Now, the ecliptic has a north and a south pole, which is the north ecliptic pole and the south ecliptic pole. And the moon spends half of its time in the northern ecliptic hemisphere and half of its time in the southern ecliptic hemisphere. And on its trajectory, it crosses the ecliptic twice. It's able to cross it or intersect it because the orbital plane of the moon is at a 5-degree angle with respect to the ecliptic. So these orbits exist in different planes. Now, whenever the moon travels from the northern ecliptic hemisphere to the southern ecliptic hemisphere and crosses the ecliptic, this is where the descending node, or the south node, or in Vedic astrology referred to as Ketu, is being formed. And whenever the moon travels from the southern ecliptic hemisphere to the northern ecliptic hemisphere and crosses the ecliptic, this is where the ascending node, or the north node, or Rahu, is being formed. The ascending and descending node form a line, which is what is referred to as the line of nodes. It is along this line that eclipses occur. So where the moon's orbit around the Earth intersects with the ecliptic is where the line of nodes is drawn. And that's why the ecliptic is called the ecliptic, because it's on the apparent path of the Sun going around the Earth that the eclipses occur, when the moon lands along that path. Eclipses can only happen at full moon and new moon. This is when the Sun, the Earth, and the moon are all in a straight line, or near straight line, which is called syzygy. The reason why they don't happen every full moon and every new moon is due to the fact that the orbit of the moon is tilted relative to the ecliptic plane, as I've mentioned before. So the Earth and the moon both go around the Sun, and the tilt of the orbital plane of the moon changes direction relative to the Sun. So the angle makes that the moon often passes below or above the Earth. And at these times, the moon doesn't cross the line between the Sun and the Earth. We know that the tilt of the Earth, which is 23.5 degrees, causes the seasons, right? So that's why summer and winter happen every 6 months. Similarly, eclipses also tend to occur about every 6 months. Every calendar year has a minimum of 4 eclipses, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, and even sometimes 7. And this is because the plane of the moon keeps about the same direction in space. Now let's talk a bit about solar eclipses. What happens during a solar eclipse is that the new moon moves between the Sun and the Earth, blocking the rays of the Sun and casting a shadow on parts of the Earth. Parts of the Earth because the moon's shadow is not big enough to cover the whole entire planet. As a result of the movement of the Earth around its axis and its movement around the Sun, and then the moon going around the Earth, the course of the eclipse changes, and it looks like the eclipse is traveling. The complete shadow of the moon onto the Earth is 270 kilometers wide. The moon has an elliptical orbit, so depending on where it is during the year, the distance from Earth changes. So during a solar eclipse, when the moon is at its farthest distance from Earth, which is referred to as apogee, it appears to be smaller, and during the solar eclipse leaves a ring of fire, which is what we call an annular solar eclipse. This comes from the Latin word annulus, which means ring. This is when the moon covers the center of the sun, and at its maximum darkest point during the eclipse, it leaves a ring of fire. It's interesting because it is the only time that we can actually see the new moon silhouetted against the sun. Any other new moon, we can't see the moon as she is not being illuminated by the sun, and at these times she is blended in with the dark night sky, which makes her completely invisible. A lunar eclipse only happens during a full moon, when the Earth casts a shadow on the moon. So when the Earth lies exactly between the sun and the moon lies in the shadow of the Earth, is when a lunar eclipse occurs. This is what we call a blood moon, because of the sunlight that passes through the atmosphere of the Earth. Eclipses are the most dramatic celestial events we can see with the naked eye, and they always come in pairs. Well, rarely they come in trios. So either we have a solar eclipse first, and then 2 weeks later a lunar eclipse, or vice versa. The foundation of astrology is deriving meaning from astronomical phenomena. To the naked eye, eclipses appear to be the most dramatic celestial events. Therefore, observing eclipses has led astrologers to bestow upon the lunar nodes such meanings as radical, extreme, destabilizing, and transformative. Every morning, the sun rises over the eastern horizon, giving birth to a new day. When a child is born, astrologers calculate the intersection between the eastern horizon and the ecliptic in order to determine the ascendant, aka rising sign or lagna. Although not a celestial body, the ascendant is a key point in the natal chart, revealing information about the person's body, physical appearance, and the body's path. Similarly, Rahu is called North Node or Ascending Node because it rises over the ecliptic horizon as a result of the moon's path crossing the path of the sun. The two luminaries, sun and moon, are at the core of creating and interpreting astrological charts. Through the moon, we experience ourselves subjectively with our needs, emotions, and inner knowing. The sun represents the light of consciousness, the essence of life, the utmost masculine archetype, which symbolically impregnates the utmost feminine archetype, the moon, thus conceiving Rahu, the individual consciousness. In the nodal axis, Rahu is the head, the upper part, where all the sense organs are situated. Rahu has a voracious appetite for life. It amplifies the needs, emotions, and longings of the moon. I like to call Rahu the moon's fantasy. The exaltation sign of the moon is Taurus, which is the face in astrological anatomy. So this is the area where the senses are experiencing the world. Hindu astrologers consider the nodes to be Caesars or grahas, So they take whatever planet and sign and house they touch in the horoscope and embark on a journey. Interestingly enough, some Hindu astrologers consider Rahu to be very well placed in Taurus, perhaps because that is the moon's exaltation, and Rahu would amplify that sign of moon's exaltation. We talked so much about the North Node already, perhaps because of its seductive appeal and illusion-filled aura. But at the other end of the nodal axis there is Ketu, the South Node, the descending node of the moon, formed when the moon sets under the ecliptic horizon in a horoscope. So while Rahu is similar to the rising sign and the birth of something, Ketu is like the descendant, the seventh house, the setting of the sun and the death of something. While Rahu is the head, Ketu is the headless body, the internalizing of needs and knowingness, ancestral lineage and past lives, and death of individual consciousness. While Rahu is worldly and extroverted, Ketu is spiritual and introverted. However, if the individual fails to integrate the nodal lessons in their respective houses, signs, and planets they touch, the axis becomes imbalance and chaos in a person's life, through the extreme manifestation of the nodes as compulsion, addiction, and rigidity. In astrology, the North Node is the point in need of development, and the South Node is the security paradigm we fall back on. Rahu is the future, always moving forward, oftentimes compulsively. That's why it is also associated with technology, illusion, and artificial ways seeking to push the boundaries of human existence. Ketu is the past, where we come from, past lives and ancestral lineage, where we retreat to as our comfort zone. But that comfort zone can also act as a limiting self-imposed prison, a dead end. So the extreme effects of Ketu can lead to severe depression. Ketu is where we eventually find liberation, but only after having integrated the perilous journey of Rahu, a journey instigated by the trickster node that amplified the value of something opposite your comfort zone. Ages 42 and 48 are very important in a person's life as they mark the nodal maturations, and oftentimes these years bear the trademark of chaotic, compulsive, but hopefully transformative to a person's life. Now let's look a little bit at the astrological chart for the partial solar eclipse that will occur on October 25th, 2022. Here we see that the sun and moon join in the tropical sign of Scorpio. So we're going to have a new moon, in this case close to the south node or the descending node or Ketu. So we're going to have a Ketu partial solar eclipse. Ketu is where we let go of something. It's where we go deep within. It's where we go under. Ketu connects us to the past ancestral karma. Ketu is where we can also find liberation. When the time is ripe, we are liberated. We can also see that Venus is a big part of this eclipse. You can see that Venus is part of this conjunction here. Venus represents our self-value, how we value ourselves and how we value other people. Venus rules Taurus. Taurus is the sign where the moon has its exaltation. The moon is our needs. Taurus, being an earth sign, and where the moon is exalted, is a sign where we get our earthly needs met. Venus also rules Libra, an air sign. Libra is the sign of trade. It's about creating win-win. So Venus is the planet of our romantic relationships. It rules luxuries and women. It is the great benefic. We can also see that Saturn is a part of this eclipse. Saturn throws its 10th aspect, which is a planetary aspect, or if you look at the Tajika aspects, it's in a loose square to the solar eclipse. Saturn is the planet of our limitations. Through our limitations, we can reach our full potential. But Saturn also connects us to our complexes. When Saturn aspects, Saturn is a separating graha, a separating planet. When it aspects, it is very possible that we have to let go of something that does not belong anymore. Eclipses are significant symbolic marker points that indicate radical change. It's not necessarily so much about the day of the eclipse, even though it can play out like that, but it's more about the time building up to it, to the main theme of it, and then also looking at the weeks and months after. So here we can see that relationships and how we relate to ourselves and other people are under scrutiny. Expect big changes in relationships. How do you value yourself and other people? And how does that reflect in your relationship life? Now, whenever you have planets close to the second degree of any of the fixed signs, so Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, or Leo, this is when this eclipse could be a lot more intensely felt. Now let's look a little bit at the astrological chart for the total lunar eclipse that will occur on November 8th. So that'll be 2 weeks after the solar eclipse in the tropical sign of Scorpio. That was during a new moon, of course, and now moon has grown full in the tropical sign of Taurus. So we can see moon 180 degrees apart from the sun and has joined the north node, or Rahu. We can also see, and you can see it better here, that Uranus is a big part of this lunar eclipse, and Saturn even more than during the solar eclipse, where it was throwing a loose aspect. Here Saturn now is in a very tight square to the lunar eclipse. So moon is triggering that square, and at that time is going to go exactly over Uranus. Uranus is the planet of shock. It was discovered during a time when there were so many revolutions happening. Uranus is about development, revolt, rapid change, and shocks, okay? In that sense, it can also break things because it brings in things sometimes too quickly that other things just have to go. Now, Saturn, as I mentioned before, is a separating influence. Saturn is the planet of our limitations. So suddenly having to let go of something that was unrealistic in the first place, because Rahu amplifies the needs of the moon. Rahu is an amplifier, it's a trickster, it's the super ego, or a part of it. You know, it's the head of the dragon. It wants to eat and eat and eat, and it doesn't know how to stop. You know, it has a certain compulsion. That's in the negative. It can also be a very intuitive power. You know, these nodes are extremes, so extremes are always difficult to balance if we are honest with ourselves, and where we are really vulnerable to becoming weak psychologically. And we all have our weaknesses. That's where the nodes are really working, you know. So Rahu amplifies the needs of the moon, as I mentioned before. And of course, Taurus is a sign of our needs. It's a Venus ruled sign. Moon is in a good dignity there, so that's a positive thing. Mars is also not aspecting this eclipse, which is another positive thing. So, but nonetheless, you know, moon is being eclipsed, and it's under a lot of stress of all these cruel planets. Luckily, we have Venus aspecting, so that at least is going to help out, right? Perhaps with some relationships and so on. So prepare for letting go of things that really not need to be there anymore. Prepare for some sudden realizations, and realizations through having to let go of something that you don't have any control over. Suddenly it comes to light. Suddenly it's clear. So remember, a square is the most manifesting aspect because there's two powers, two forces that are being forced to work together to come to some kind of resolution. Now that can play out in a negative way because of lack of awareness, but it always depends on the awareness we bring to things, right? With awareness, this becomes or can become a very powerful aspect and a very powerful time, because sometimes we need to let go of things for the new to come in. This is letting go of something so that the new can reveal itself very suddenly and quickly. It's a time for possible radical transformation, radical changes, if you can bring awareness to what is being revealed, right? That's the aspect of Saturn. It can reveal something that is unpleasant. It can connect us to our complexes, our limitations, and so on. So it's not always difficult to detach from that. So in that sense, the shock can be, it pushes things through, right? It pushes things forward, but it can be destabilizing and uncomfortable. So we have to find balance with that. So this is not a Ketu eclipse, but it's a Rahu eclipse, which is connecting us to the future, right? Rahu wants to push forward. It's finding balance within our psychology to be able to move forward with awareness so that we can express more of who we truly are. And of course, Uranus numerologically connects to the sun. The sun is our identity. You know, the sun on a deeper level, it's the source of life, right? It is that eternal spark. It's our inspiration. But in the horoscope, it's our identity, our ideology. So Uranus wants to create changes there. Let's say bring out a better version of that sun, of that light. Okay, so this eclipse is about finding something new by letting go of what is false, what is untrue, what we no longer need. And again, that might be difficult when we're so attached to that. This can be a way of thinking or a person or whatever it might be. And in the end, eclipses are about making us humble, right? There's always forces at work, deep unconscious forces within our being that demand attention. And eclipses are these symbolic marker points where we are opening for our subconscious being more, okay? And often we are forced to. So this is a time of great opportunity. Thank you for watching. Take care.